My name is Derek Self, and this is my final presentation for UF 300 at Boise State University. And today I'm going to be going over education spending and in developing countries and the stuff that it's tied to. The amount of money developing nations spend on education is actually tied directly to life expectancy and health issues. And this is shown through comparing the spending of percentage of gross domestic product on primary education between developed and developing nations. Here's a graph from worldbank.org, acquired in 2013. If you look closely, I selected the countries of United States, South Africa, Somalia, Rwanda, Egypt, and the Democratic Republic of Congo to really show what these countries are spending in regards to education. The reason why I put United States is, as a developed nation, the United States is a great example, just based on that fact. All politics aside, and what we agree and disagree with how our country does stuff doesn't really apply to this. As you can see throughout the years right here, the United States has spent about the same. There's not any big drops or gains in how much percentage GDP we are spending towards primary education, and this is strictly primary. So in America, that would be grades K through 6, or K through 5, or K through 8, depending on the state. And then right here we have Somalia. South Africa, Egypt, and Congo actually didn't show up on this graph. I don't know if they just don't really spend a lot of money towards primary education, or if it's just data that World Bank hasn't been able to get from those countries. As you can see, Somalia has, from 2004 to 2006, there was an increase, and then a decline, and then an increase as well. So it looks like about every 2 years they're having a fluctuation in how much they're spending towards primary education. What's interesting is down here you have Rwanda, who is spending right around anywhere between 9.8% GDP down to 6% GDP, and it fluctuates as well with the data that they have. And actually right here is Congo. So starting in 2010, World Bank was actually able to get data from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So let's go ahead and look at the life expectancy. We'll go ahead and zoom in here. So looking at the United States, right around 80 years, and it's a pretty straight line. I think that's something that we can say about the United States, is that we definitely have life expectancy and longevity going well for us, and there's no real push to really increase that. I mean, we are trying to increase it, but it's not like we're dying at 40, all of the adults in America. So that's a good constant to have. And then right here is Egypt. So they're up there as well. Egypt is a great example of a developed African nation, especially where Islam is prevalent. A lot of the data that I was able to pull, there were big comparisons between is Islam present and isn't. Not necessarily saying that Islam is the cause, but just because with African countries you really have to show if it's an Islamic nation or not. So let's go ahead and zoom in more here. And then the biggest one to see is really Rwanda. We can see here you've got the Democratic Republic of Congo. They're right around like 45 years. Slowly starting to rise, as you can see down here. Starting in about 2009, you start seeing their life expectancy to rise, and you can see that with a lot of the African countries, like with South Africa and Somalia, really starting to rise. But Rwanda is a huge example right here. Back in 2004, they're around 52, 53 years life expectancy, and then all the way up to 2011, so 7 years later, they're at about 62 years life expectancy. So in a matter of 7 years, they raised their life expectancy rate 10%, which is a huge number. And when you look at them compared to Egypt and the U.S., I mean, those are good numbers right there, showing a good trajectory for them to really reach where developed nations are today. So after life expectancy, looking at these graphs, we can see that there is a correlation of spending on education and life expectancy, especially primary education. In 2010, the Democratic Republic of Congo spent 5.2% of their GDP towards education, while in the same year, they held an average life expectancy rate of 49 years. Compare this to Rwanda, who has seen a large increase of life expectancy from 53.5 in 2004 to 62.9 in 2011. During this time, Rwanda actually spent anywhere from 6.9 to 9.1% of their GDP on primary education. I think it's interesting to point out that their spending has fluctuated, and it hasn't necessarily been constant. And I think that shows their government's concern and that they really are paying attention to where this money is going and making changes as needed. They also have an under 5 mortality rate of 51 in every 1,000, and that's according to UNICEF. And also, according to UNICEF, their net attendance ratio for primary grades is 86% for males and 89% for females. In primary, in most African countries, is actually K through essentially their sophomore year, grade ages 5 or 6 up to 16. So for us in America, we see primary as elementary school, but in Africa, primary is elementary, junior high, and a little bit of high school. Now, looking at secondary spending, let's go ahead and zoom in here. So right here you have the United States, and then we've got, this is Somalia right here, and here's Rwanda. And this is what I think is interesting, is America, once again, you have constant variables. I mean, there's little fluctuation, but it's really pretty much set in stone. And then Somalia here, seeing jumps, and it's really not a lot of percentage GDP that they're spending, especially in 2008, on secondary education. And then, of course, Democratic Republic of Congo down here in 2010. What I think is interesting here is Rwanda. You've got about 32 to 34% changes between, or change between 32 and about 34% of their gross domestic product in between 2007 and 2008. And then in 2010 and 2011, we're looking at about 37 up to 39% of their gross GDP, which is huge. I mean, that's almost half of their income that they are spending towards secondary education. And this is due in part because secondary is junior and senior years in high school, and a lot of these kids don't really have any pursuit of doing anything after they get their basic education. So Rwanda is a great example of where they're spending their money and how. It's not necessarily how much you put into it, but where you're putting that money. And according to the quality of secondary education in Africa, usually senior secondary level in Africa is accessed by too few students and is only seen as a platform for entering tertiary education, which is post-secondary college and whatnot. So these kids are seeing their high school as essentially, well, if I want to go on to college and become a doctor or something, then I'll go to high school, which for us in America isn't the case. And then here's a graph on post-secondary spending. You can see U.S., we're pretty constant here, and then Rwanda spending huge amounts of money on post-secondary. So you can see where they have their primary enrollment rates up to a very high percentage, and now they're really putting money and resources into post-secondary and secondary education, which is really key because if you think about it, you want to train educators in your country and you want to keep them going. So Rwanda isn't just spending money on building schools and teacher salaries. They're spending on making sure that they get an end product in their investment with these kids and making sure that these children eventually will give back to their community and to their nation. And that's from World Bank as well. So before I get to my conclusion, a couple of things from the Half the Sky book that I found interesting was where Una Osili of Indiana University and Bridget Long of Harvard examined a vast expansion of primary education that began in 1976 in Nigeria, and they concluded that each additional year of primary education leads to girls having 0.26 fewer children. And that is huge because, as we read through the book, the later in life that these women have families, it is kind of tied to their health as well. And I could get more into that, but really don't have time for this. And that was touched in the TED videos that we watched and the book. Something interesting too is of the 115 million children who have dropped out of elementary school, 57% are girls. In South and West Asia, 2/3 of the children who are out of schools are girls. And I think that has a lot to come down to essentially social norms for their country. And also, in the book, it touched on where, here's a great quote, African girls typically use and reuse old rags during their periods, and they often only have a single torn pair of underwear. For fear of embarrassing leaks and stains, girls sometimes stay home during that time. And that, I mean, that's once a month or however regular they are in their country. They're missing school. They're losing out on their education. And in the book, it said where there is a project right now to get these girls sanitary pads and pretty much allowing them to go to school while still having their periods. Another great example of where to spend the money and not just dumping money into it, because a lot of these countries are getting money from donor nations. Here's a great quote. One of the most cost-effective ways to increase school attendance is to deworm students. Increasing school attendance by building schools ends up costing about $100 every year for every additional student enrolled. Boosting attendance by deworming children costs only $4 per year per additional student enrolled. So right there, I mean, that's a huge change in cost right there. So in conclusion, through these examples, we can see that the countries that have devoted spending on post-primary education have seen their life expectancy rise. Life expectancy is also tied to health programs. However, that alone has been proven ineffective. Rwanda is a great example of how concentrating on educating past the primary grades has helped Rwanda towards becoming a developed nation. Thank you.